Well, welcome everyone, and a very warm welcome too to our panelists. Maite Gomez from Spain, Yoav Datalo is joining us from Italy, Carly Way from the States, and Lee Blackburn from the United Kingdom. A few months ago, we sent out the Lucis Trust letter, which was titled In Search of a New Culture, Perspectives on Human Flourishing. And this was also the theme of our October World Goodwill seminar. In this Lucis Trust seminar, we wanted to take the theme further from the angle of the new psychology. And we hope to see developing, and we hope that this will be developing in the very near future. In fact, it probably already is. In the Alice Bailey writings, we're told that there are 7 departments of endeavor that make up the divine plan for humanity: government, religion, and education being the main 3, and then science, philosophy, psychology, and culture and the arts. So in the Arcane School, we focus as a group on these various departments of the plan with the aim of serving humanity through the building of clear, plan-imbued thought forms, through the technique of esoteric meditation. And we thought it would be good to widen the domain of this service project and involve interested co-workers and friends of the Lucis Trust in general. So today we'll be exploring the Department of Psychology and discussing how psychology is steadily externalizing the soul principle. And we'll be doing this in relation to the following passage from Alice Bailey's book on esoteric psychology. Modern esoteric science knows much about the outer form or matter aspect and its electrical nature. Esoteric science knows much about the nature of the subjective energies and the qualities which color and condition the form. When these two knowledges are brought intelligently together, we shall evolve a truer and more accurate psychology and a new science of human culture. Then the work of unifying man, man the psychic entity, and man the conditioning soul will go rapidly forward. And so the aim of the webinar is to discuss the general field of psychology as it is now in relation to the service of the plan and how the work of the new group of world servers is progressing in relation to this passage. And so we hope to have a wide-ranging discussion that includes some of the problems of modern psychology, encouraging developments that are taking place in the field, the work of pioneers like Roberto Assagioli, and onto esoteric psychology as given in the writings of Alice Bailey. To begin with, though, I'd like to offer a few thoughts from a slightly left of field perspective that we explored this month in the Arcane School. And they will be using a visualization that resonates with the theme of color. As many of you will know, the foundation of Alice Bailey's writings on esoteric psychology are the 7 rays that inform and condition all life. And each of these rays is associated with a specific color. Color, therefore, has a powerful effect on human consciousness. Furthermore, the wisdom and faculty gained by each human being through the vicissitudes of daily life are translated into color on the plane of the soul and built into the vestiges of consciousness, the causal body or egoic lotus. So every human being's state of consciousness is indicated by the size, the color, and the activity of the energies which compose the petals of the lotus. So when individualization from the animal state of consciousness occurred some 21 million years ago, each newly formed causal body had the appearance of a colorless ovoid holding the ego or soul like a yolk within an eggshell. But towards the end of evolution, a wondrous transformation has transpired. The outer sphere is palpitating with every color in the rainbow and is of a wide radius. The streams of electrical energy circulating in it are so powerful that they are escaping beyond the periphery of the circle, resembling the rays of the sun. The 9 petals are fully unfolded, forming a gracious setting for the central jewel. And their orange hue is now of a gorgeous translucence, shot with many colors, and of the egoic ray predominating. So, to better understand the relationship between color and consciousness, we can consider the interaction of the two poles of existence, spirit and matter, in terms of light and darkness. Their interactions producing color of various qualities. Experiments by Goethe help to prepare the way for this field of research. For, as the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein commented in his thesis on culture and value, I believe that what Goethe was really seeking was not a physiological, but a psychological theory of colors. So this adds another dimension to a statement made by Goethe as to how this theory of colors differed to the views of Isaac Newton, arguing that color was not simply a scientific measurement, but a subjective experience perceived differently by each viewer. The theory begins with colorless light and avails itself of outward conditions to produce colored phenomena. But it concedes worth and dignity to these conditions. It does not arrogate to itself developing colors from the light, but rather seeks to prove by numberless cases that color is produced by light, as well as by what stands against it. White that becomes darkened or dimmed inclines to yellow. Black, as it becomes lighter, inclines to blue. So esoterically considered, pure yellow is related to the Christ or Buddhic state of consciousness. The conditions for this goal of human evolution being set up at the time of individualization through the following process. A downflow of buddhi takes place until it reaches a point at the very center of the lotus. There, by the power of its own vibration, 3 more petals appear which close in on the central flame, covering it closely and remaining closed until the time comes for the revelation of the jewel in the lotus. So when opened, these mysterious inner petals are described as having a lovely lemon yellow hue. And there are further complementary thoughts on the esoteric significance of the color yellow. And these include yellow harmonizes. It marks completion and fruition. Note how in autumn, when the processes of nature have run their course and the cycle is complete, the yellow of the autumn is spread upon the landscape. Note also that when the sun pours unimpeded down, the yellow of the harvest is also to be seen. So it is in the life of the spirit. When the 4th plane of harmony or buddhi is achieved, then is consummation. And when the work of the personality is completed, and when the sun of the microcosm, the ego or soul, pours unimpeded down into the personal life, then comes fruition and harvest. and another, the influence of the fourth ray of harmony and beauty, and the developing power of the fifth ray of knowledge, synonymous to the merging of the intuition and the intellect in the highly evolved person, have a definite effect upon the vegetable kingdom than upon the human aura. Yellow-orange shines forth in both. So these thoughts give us much to ponder in relation to current research on the effects of color on both physical and psychological health. For the Tibetan predicted that in the future, color will be applied on the subtler planes by the power of thought and by means of colored lights applied to the physical body. So anyone who would like to explore the subject further, we recommend The Principles of Light and Color by Edwin Babbitt. And for an overview of current developments, the work of the International Light Association is of interest, along with the pioneering work of Jacob Lieberman and Ananda Martel. So the current research into color in healing and psychological well-being will surely be part of the psychology of the future. And Carl Jung is credited with stating that colors are the mother tongue of the subconscious. And we might extend this to the superconscious too, for the colors of the aura change during human evolution. And this is brought about by the transmutation of vices into virtues. A vice is dominance of an involutional quality of the same force which at a later period will show forth as a virtue. So as the race progresses as a collective unit, those who gaze upon it from a higher plane are aware of the steady improvement in the colors seen. And so this leads us to a visualization, which we'd like to hold in the group mind today and energize together. It's called the Sun on the Square and is one of a series of formulas that are said to stand back of human evolution. But before we reflect upon the Sun on the Square, it's helpful to know some background to it. It was given out by the Tibetan in discipleship in the New Age too, in connection with one of the formulas for revelation. In this case, Formula 4, titled Lead Us from Chaos to Beauty. And it's presented in the form of a symbol, one which is in such constant movement that it's difficult to describe or to make it live before you. So the investigator is asked to reflect on a square or oblong composed of a kaleidoscopic mass of inchoate colors, moving, pulsating, and in constant indescribable confusion, on which is superimposed a radiant sun, with a penumbra composed of 7 prismatic colors. And these radiate from the sun in regular rhythmic bands and produce a marvelous blaze of color. So it's important to know that the formula differs according to the polarization of the one who sees and studies it. In other words, whether focused in the personality or in the soul, 2 types of energy will have their effect, and therefore 2 different pictures will emerge, both correct from the point of view of the interpreter. It's suggested that this formula, if carefully considered and studied for a number of years, will become a key form by means of which aspects of the creative process will be revealed, plus a revelation as to some of the divine objectives, which are wider and greater and richer in implication than has been realized. So these formulas are symbols of the future, not the past, and they're predictive rather than pictorial presentations of what is. And clearly, interpretation will need the awakening of the intuition to help entrance to the world of meaning, which is the domain of the soul. So let's go into the visualization now. Visualization, sun upon the square. Group fusion. Imagine the collective consciousness of all who are participating in this event, fusing into one united organism, mediating between the human kingdom and the kingdom of souls. Visualize the formula, the sun upon the square. Opening up before the group mind, a square or oblong composed of a kaleidoscopic mass of inchoate colors, moving, pulsating, and in constant, indescribable confusion. Superimposed upon the square is a radiant sun with a penumbra composed of the 7 prismatic colors. And these colors radiate from the sun in regular rhythmic bands and produce a marvelous blaze of color. The background of the square appears to have a confusion of colors of a heavy and lurid quality. The scheme of beauty emerging is translucent and delicate, with a radiant living hue. The heavier background can be distinctly seen through the translucence. Meditate on the directive of this symbol formula, lead us from chaos to beauty. And as you do so, visualize the bands of prismatic color radiating out from the sun and through the group mind and heart, carrying those revelatory energies which are ready to emerge in the world. distribution. In the center of all love, I stand. From that center, I, the soul, will outward move. From that center, I, the one who serves, will work. May the love of the divine self be shed abroad in my heart, through my group, and throughout the world. Oh, 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 sorry, my voice is gone. Thank you, everyone. I'm now going to hand you over to Lawrence to view a video. Thank you.
Right, well, unfortunately for everyone, my voice hasn't gone. And
sorry about that.
well, the energies are high and they really get to the throat center. You know, that's been our experience for decades around the time of the full moon, holding on to those energies. And that's a good sign, really, of the amount of energy that can be associated with a meeting like this, when all of us are coming together, really. It's an act of service and building a group thought form together to be positioned on that bridge of consciousness in between where exoteric psychology is now and the esoteric psychology, which we're more familiar with, most of us, I think, and then to position it as a stepping stone from one to the other. So what I thought would be good, me and Chris thought would be very good to start off with, would be to look at some of the developments that have happened fairly recently in psychology, and to see how that first stepping stone has been placed. As you'll learn from all our other panelists after this video, there are, of course, many psychologists to mention and to draw upon. But we wanted to place a particular focus to start off with on positive psychology. Many of you will have heard of that, and it's got you know, a bit of a bad name, I think, in the press, probably because of the way it's developed outside certain curriculums. But for those of you who remember this mailing that we sent out, the Lucis Trust mailing, we referred to how positive psychology first started through the work of Martin Seligman. And I'll just read you this paragraph from it. The concept of flourishing is credited to Dr. Martin Seligman, who used his inaugural address as the incoming president of the American Psychological Association in 1998 to shift the focus from mental illness and pathology to studying what is good and positive in life. The theme of his presidency marked the beginning of a new domain in psychology known as positive psychology, an approach that builds on the work of pioneers in humanistic psychology such as Abraham Maslow. I mean, it's true that even in ancient Greece, Aristotle promoted the concept of eudaimonia, and others would say it was actually Socrates before him who did this, and Aristotle just made it popular. The condition of human flourishing and living well. And as with positive psychology, there's, I think, a misinterpretation of the goal being happiness, which isn't actually true, I don't think, because it has little to do with a pleasant state of mind and emotions. It's more accurately defined as the activity of the soul in accordance with complete virtue. activity in accordance with reason, with man's highest function. So perhaps there's an argument for saying it's more akin to what we would term joy, but that's something we can explore later. But we'll start off by showing a video by someone that Carly Way, one of the panelists, recommended to us, because he was also collaborating with Martin Seligman, and they both wanted to bring in a new and fresh look at psychology. And his name was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is quite difficult to remember, but I've managed it this time. So we're going to watch a 10-minute video of that, and about his very simple explanation of the nature of flow and creativity. And then we're going to explore in our first session, 15 minutes or so, with our panelists, how that relates to our esoteric understanding of flow and perhaps the divine circulatory flow. So if we could show that now, Michael and Mikhail. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on creativity, flow, and the evolving self. With me is Professor Mihai Csikszentmihalyi of the Department of Psychology at the University of Chicago, where he is the former chairman. He's the author of numerous books, including the bestseller Flow, which we'll be talking about during this half hour, and also the evolving self and creativity. Welcome, Mihai.
Thank you.
It's good to be back with you again. Flow is a fascinating concept, and many, many people have resonated to that book and to your writing, because I think it deals with something everyone's interested in: human happiness, passion, pleasure, what makes life itself worth living. And you've sort of encapsulated all of that in the notion of flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was lucky to stumble on that on this concept, which all of us know about its existence. We all have experienced it one time or the other, but psychology was not very quick on picking up on that, being preoccupied mostly with pathology, with what's wrong with the human condition. But I had seen enough problems during World War II as a child. I'd seen the disintegration of cultures and people living unhappy lives and doing more harm to each other than good. And I was trying to understand whether there was more to life than that. You know, whether is this all there is? You know, war and poverty and inhumanity. And I knew that there must be something different because I had experienced it, but there was no good way to talk about it. There was no terminology, there was no theory to explain what is that part of life which is worth living. And I was searching for that, and it was as a graduate student when I started studying artists that I began to notice the similarity in their behavior when they became lost in the process of creating a work of art, and they were so concentrated and focused and so involved and would not put down their brush for anything. It was just too important for them to continue. And I tried to understand, okay, well, this is a great, it seems that these people are really living to the fullest of their potential during these periods. Now, is there any other way of experiencing this type of feeling? And at that point I decided to study other individuals who are not creative in the sense of being artists and so forth, but who seem to spend long periods of time doing things for which they get no usual rewards like money or fame or recognition. And so I started looking at rock climbers, interviewing rock climbers, interviewing chess players, dancers, composers of music, athletes of different kind, who seem to derive a great deal of satisfaction from what they were doing, and not from the results of what they were doing. They weren't getting great rewards except the activity itself. And it was this common, what was so surprising is that people in this greatly different activities, chess and rock climbing and art and music, they describe how they feel when they are really involved in what they're doing and enjoying it. They describe it in very similar ways. And this gave me the idea that, well, all of us have the potential to experience these. Some of us will experience it through sports, some through art, some through some other activity like chess or working with computers, but it is what in a sense we are programmed to do as human beings, is to experience this full involvement with life.
Now, a great psychologist who influenced me in my early years was Abraham Maslow, who, like you, studied people of this sort, and he developed a notion, I think a little different. He talked about peak experiences that all of these people reported, but I gather that this is not the same as the flow state.
Well, I think that probably what Maslow was talking about, and by the way, he influenced me too. I was also a grad student when he started writing. This peak experience seems to be the most developed form of flow. I don't. I think though that one problem I had with the peak experience notion was that it seemed to come as a kind of epiphany out of the blue to people who are kind of prepared for it and
almost mystical.
Yeah, right. Whereas what I saw these people doing, whom I was studying, is to develop slowly the ability to produce this experience through involvement with a particular activity. So it wasn't something mysterious or kind of chancy, but it was the result of one's own doing.
And you described flow in a way that struck me as paradoxical in this sense, that people who experience flow in their lives are often the happiest people. They're passionate and involved in their work, but happiness is not what they're even thinking about when they're engaged.
Exactly. No, suppose that you are a rock climber, and as you're climbing this very difficult rock, you start thinking how happy you are. You know, I mean, probably you will fall down, or you are singing a song or playing an instrument, and as you're playing, you say, "Oh, isn't this great?" You know, you would be missing the music. So you can't. When you're really involved, you don't have time to be happy. You cannot afford to be happy. It's afterwards when you look back and you say, "What was that about?" You know, I never felt so good. I never felt so part of life. You know, I was never so completely myself. And then you say, "Aha, that must be happiness." I mean, that's what I want.
It sounds like what you're saying is that being happy is very different from thinking about being happy.
Right. Those are two different moments of the process. Yeah.
And the people who are skilled at experiencing flow throughout their lives, you describe this, I think, as a skill that can be learned, and that is, it's not about seeking the thrill of the flow state. It's more about living your whole life holistically.
Well, yeah, there are people who do it by developing one or two skills at which they can. For instance, I don't know if you are an athlete or a bicycle, you like to bicycle, so every weekend you go out, and as you tour the countryside, you feel this flow experience, and you go back refreshed. And
I've run a few marathons, actually.
Okay,
so
marathon is one. So you can do it this way, of having certain activities that will produce flow, and they become kind of the benchmarks of your life, and you look back on them, and they give the rest of your life a feeling of replenishment. You are recreating yourself when you do those things. But the other possibility is to transform the kind of everyday routines of life, from brushing your teeth to cooking to washing dishes, into little works of art which have their own goals and their own rules, and then you don't need these peaks of these great moments of flow, but you can experience it throughout.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome now our panelists. If we could bring them up on screen, if you could unmute yourself and start your videos, please. I just need Yoav and the softly spoken Christine. I'll just quickly introduce you for those who are coming late. Carly Way, at the top right of your screen, Professor of Sociology and Psychology at Yavapai College, Arizona, I presume, yes. Yoav Datilo, he's not here at the moment, but he will magically appear at some point. There, yes, here he is. Yoav, bottom right, psychologist, training psychotherapist and clinical supervisor, former president of the Italian Society of Psychosynthesis Psychotherapy. Top left, Maite Gomez, psychosynthesis, psychotherapist and supervisor and Sundal House co-worker. And bottom left, we've got Lee Blackburn, Dr. Lee Blackburn, who's a medical practitioner. So perhaps, Carly, you'd like to just kick off and tell us a little bit more about the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, if I've got that right, and disabuse us of the notion that positive psychology is just about happiness.
Oh my gosh, you're really putting me on the spot here. Well, the way that I explain flow to my students is there are so many other analogies. It's really about being mindful, but they don't know that yet. But there are just so many parallels. They often can relate to being in the zone. That's something that's talked about a lot in the US, about when you're totally immersed in what you're doing, you're in the zone. And I really loved the example that Mihai shared in the video about rock climbing. There is a popular documentary on Netflix in the US. I don't know if all of you, it made its way around the world, probably with Netflix, but it's Alex Honnold. And he talked about scaling Yosemite without any ropes. And I'm trying to remember the name of the documentary, but I loved the fact that, that's a perfect example. If you watch him, he is just riveted, has to be, of course, because he's climbing without ropes, but he is totally in the zone. He is not, if you hear him in interviews, he's not really focused on happiness. This is what he's doing. He's intrinsically motivated, completely in the zone, completely in flow. And if he thought about being happy, then of course he would fall. So it is so interesting that this flow, this idea of joy and happiness is actually, it just emerges naturally if you find yourself engaged in something that you have a great deal of intrinsic motivation for. No one has to pay you to do it. You just love it and you're driven. This is really your soul externalization, if you will, from the inside out. This is what you are called to do, and you're following your journey, your pathway. So I hope, as you know, when I present, I kind of go on tangents. So I hope that gets us started a little bit.
Please, anyone just come in as you want to. I take from it that one pointed concentration to whatever you're doing is to do with the flow state.
There's something I like about what Professor Mihail said, which is that all of us have the potential to be in flow, that it's not something just for very special people like the people that he will study, but that all of us have the potential. And I like even better what he said, that we are programmed for this. I think this is what has strong connotations to our work and to esoteric psychology, because it's about recognizing the potential that we all have to be in that state. I think what he may not look at so deeply is what we need to go through first before being in that state, which is maybe a disintegrated personality or many distortions in the personality that don't allow us to be in that state every day. And we cannot ignore that. Talking about flow, we need to be doing both things, looking at the personality struggles and then the experience of flow. But I think what he's saying has a lot of connotations for our as esotericists. I think he speaks about a state of contemplation, of deep concentration, of mindfulness, in which we live at the fullest of our potential, which for me, of course, is that the personality will be integrated and we will be soul infused in very different degrees. It's all a question of degrees and a matter of evolution. But I like what he's saying, and I like that this is becoming part of what is in the consciousness of everybody. It's not a knowledge that is for the few, as it used to be in the past. So it's for the masses, and it's in communication media and in social media. And I think that's a very positive development.
Yeah,
it's interesting that it's about motion as well. You know, it's not a static state. It's about motion, but motion of what exactly? Lee, sorry.
Yeah, I think there's some very important points there. I don't know enough about flow theory to know whether he offers a means to get to that state. But my impression is that he's studied people that obviously managed to get there. And I agree, it's almost like an instantaneous, well, in some cases instantaneous, but certainly a very rapid ability to raise the consciousness into the head, move into a meditative state, and then perhaps in some cases even reach the point of contemplation, who knows? But I think you're right to suggest that for many people, unless you've got something that you're really, really interested in and makes you want to sit down and go into that zone, you know, and this all ties in with meaning in life. What is it that makes us tick? And do we want to sit down and do this thing? For example, an artist probably would want to be doing their art rather than anything else. And it's very easy in that situation, I think, to raise yourself into that level of consciousness. So I don't know whether he offers any pathway to get there, or whether it's just a case of trying to concentrate on something that you're genuinely interested in. But I think for everyone that's involved in occult meditation, I think most of us have some concept of what's perhaps going on there, because even if we concentrate, and we know that we have seed thoughts that don't necessarily appeal to us, but nevertheless, if we think about it long enough, we find ourselves interested in it. So it's something that can be forced, but in the case of many of his studies, I think it was very much just their natural inclination and desire to just become very deeply involved in it. He talked about the, I don't know whether it was in this video, but we watched one previously by this gentleman, and he talked about the number of messages that we can perceive at one time. And he talks about how to be aware of your body, you need to be able to take in so much information, which is almost at the limit of what we can do. And that once you go above that, you become not aware of your body. I'm not entirely convinced by that argument. I think it's literally that you're on a different plane, and therefore you're not in contact, as it were, with those physical realities, and you're essentially on the mental plane, perhaps even higher for some people.
It has something to do, doesn't it, of some level of synthesis, Yoav, you know, for the normal person wanting to know how that they can lead the creative life, and the same for, you know, people like ourselves who are, you know, working with esoteric meditations. It's all about learning how to transform the mundane into a truly creative act.
I will just say, I will start with a story, a Hasidic story, just that came to mind when I heard about flow. Though my goal was to give a wider perspective and an overall spiritual awakening in the landscape of psychology, which is currently happening. And it's amazing. This is really externalizing the soul principle. But I'll just tell you a short story. A young rabbi goes to a Hasidic story, goes to his master, the Baal Shem Tov, asking for help, and said to his master, when I chant the Torah, literally the teaching, in public to my congregation, I stammer and get confused. What can I do about it? The master said to him, do not chant the Torah. Let the Torah chant through you, and you will forget about yourself, and the chant will flow. So this is what normally happens when we, in psychosynthesis and psychosynthesis terminology, I would speak about disidentification, concentration, self-identification. That would be too long. I think Carly spoke about mindfulness, which is exactly the same. And if you go to ancient sources of wisdom, you find the same. What I'm interested, if you think it is appropriate, I would just point out three main ideas, which are really transversally pervading the field of psychology. The idea of a higher self, i.e. the soul, the idea of working with energies, transmutation, some sublimation, bioenergetics, psychoenergetics, and the will.
So we'll certainly be coming on to discuss that in detail in our next session.
Okay.
But from what you're saying about sublimation, if we were to relate that to flow, I'm presuming you have to, first of all, create a point of tension or a point of mentality, of mental energy, before you can allow something to flow through you. Otherwise, you just become a negative channel and anything can flow through you. So the quality of the channel, producing that, is as important as then allowing it to flow through.
Yeah, that's the work. I mean, that's the work.
One-pointedness.
Don't mind me, anyone come in as they want.
Concentration is a key word. Concentration.
Everybody has a different level of concentration. And this isn't meant to be facetious, really, but if you look at a dog, waiting for its lunch, that you're about to feed you, I mean, that is a very, very good demonstration of one point.
Yeah, no, but let me be clear.
Focused on that work of you preparing it, putting it in the bowl, and then they're on it. But at that level, it's desire that educates you, and then your desires slowly get transmuted, and that's the whole process of the evolution of consciousness, isn't it? So concentration is being developed in all kingdoms of nature.
Yeah, but as I tried to say before, we have different steps: disidentification from the personality and connection to the higher unconscious and to the higher self, which is the soul. So it's cleansing the channel, but connecting. Without that, I don't care about making money, about happiness, and about it's really not my cup of tea. My real goal is a meaningful life and attaining joy as an expression of the soul.
Don't you think that that's really happiness is an unfortunate term to use in one sense, because we think it's something to do with vacantly skipping through the woods, or something that's like a pleasing emotion, whereas joy, a higher correspondence of that, do you think that really some of the positive psychologists, surely that's what they're really meaning, a joyful state?
They probably mean that, but they emphasize too much, you know, businessmen, successful people and achievement. And, you know, when you run after something,
Yes,
it's not about joy.
yes.
Service, I would say the word service would change our consciousness totally about the flow.
But I did.
Flow and service,
Yeah.
not the flow in being a
Generation.
great businessman or a great professional or even a great artist or even brushing my teeth with, you know, in Hebrew they say kavanah, which is the flow, is the inner intention. It's a very old idea, and it's kind of a platitude after all, but it's well demonstrated and well used by Carly in a practical context, and that makes a lot of sense to me.
It's a way it seems.
I wanted to pipe in with one thing that it was just a wonderful point that was just made, that I think what happens is that these new ideas are introduced and they're sometimes seized upon by people who interpret it at their level of awareness and life. And so it then becomes about happiness and chasing after things. And it's like, okay, that was not exactly the intention, but it's just like with esotericism, people get it depending on where they're at and how they're perceiving things. And there are higher interpretations and lower, and it's like that with everything.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in there just regarding happiness. My first inclination was to agree with that happiness is really not the goal, but I wonder if we might be giving happiness a bad press. I think it's nice not to be unhappy. And also happiness, I guess for some people, they may confuse joy with happiness, because although joy is, it depends whether you look at things as happiness as a pursuit of sensual pleasure, which of course that's not really the spiritual goal. But the to feel happy because one feels in tune and resonant with the higher self, or what one thinks is the higher self's mission and meaning, I think that you could describe that as happiness. And in fact, once we get into these levels of feeling, I don't think we have a vocabulary for that unless we go and speak in Sanskrit terms, because they've been dealing with this kind of consciousness for so many centuries. So happiness, I think, is a fair word, but could be very much misconstrued. I also absolutely agree with Carly that one of the real problems, and one wonders whether it is literally one of the ploys of the darker forces, when you have a new idea that comes through that has real potential, there is always the potential for those who don't see the real vision to take it into its lower manifestations. And to, for example, business is a very, very potent means to take something into a greed infested environment and make it something that it's really not. I have to say that Dr. Seligman, when I watched the video that he was on, he did give me the impression that he was more inclined to think of it as trying to find what makes us happy from a sensual pleasure perspective, but I may have misconstrued him. But I think the idea is sound. It's just how it's applied and whether it's applied in its higher aspect.
And there is that aspect too, that the Tibetan wanted us, and obviously as part of the service of the plan, is for the mass of people to be happy, because everybody is so miserable. So, I mean, there is these degrees of happiness and joy. There's, what if you're talking about really people who are creative and can sort of formulate their thoughts and their creativity into something really meaningful, but others can't do that. But they might have a very simple occupation, a very simple way of being. And that is something we must bear in mind too. And that was good about the video, I thought, that he did bring in those very ordinary concepts, for people of all levels of consciousness, I suppose you could say.
Maiti, do you want to just wrap this up?
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to say that one of the issues for me with the concept of happiness, the pursuit of happiness in popular psychology, is that it looks at human nature and at the challenges of human nature, and it sees that as unhappiness. And so happiness would be to go away from challenges and from distortions of the personality. And I see that in my work every day as a psychotherapist. And what I try to do in my work is to help people bear those difficulties and those challenges and those distortions, not be unhappy with them, so they don't have to go to the other extreme of looking for a happiness that means to a life devoid of conflict, because those challenges are there. We are all personalities. We are all driven by the law of polarity in our human nature. And this has to be normalized. And therefore, when it is normalized, and I hope the psychology of the future as psychosynthesis in the present knows how to do that. When it's normalized, if we don't see that as unhappiness, maybe we don't need to have that pursuit of happiness as the empty field that it is now, but to actually be happy with my own distortions, with my own contradictions, and with my own challenges, because I see how I evolve through them. And I think psychosynthesis psychotherapy, or transpersonal psychotherapy in general, can help us do that.
Okay, well, we're nicely warmed up now, so we'll take we're going to take a little break for 5 minutes. Chris, you mentioned it's good that people perhaps don't switch off their computers, just leave them running.
They mustn't.
We'll break for around 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene.
Okay, what time, Clarence?
Should we say, well, it's 3 minutes past. Should we say 10 past?
Yeah.
We'll end 5 minutes late. That's good for us. Okay, see you soon.
Sure.
Okay, do you want to
I've
mute?
never done it.
Want to mute again?
I can't see anything else.
all back now? That's great. Okay, so what we're going to do now in this session is we're starting off with 2 5-minute reflections, first from Maiti and then from Yoav. Following each reflection, there'll be a minute's silence for us all to contemplate on what has been said. Then the gong will sound, a gong. It's a little bit like what we've done in other seminars and conferences. Then Yoav will give his presentation. There'll be a minute's silence following that, the gong. And those 2 reflections will then be used to draw upon and to seed the next part of our group discussion. So, Maiti, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to contribute to group wisdom. The invitation is to reflect on the field of psychology and how this is evolving in relation to the plan as we understand it, and specifically in relation to the quote that we've seen of the Tibetans, and how the growth of positive psychology may be part of that evolution. And I'd like to offer 3 reflections. The first thing that it occurs to me when I think about positive psychology is that we have a split. We think there is a negative psychology, and therefore we need a positive psychology. That we are in a split is not an issue. Of course, we have splits. We know humanity is ruled by the law of polarity. But so what we need to do is to look at what is the split, to reflect on what we're breaking into 2, then perhaps move towards a synthetic whole, and then hold that synthetic whole as the ideal. What we're breaking into 2 is human nature. Orthodox psychology looks at what keeps us stunted, and positive psychology looks at what makes us flourish. But the issue with orthodox psychology, for me, is not what it looks, it's not what it looks at, is how it does it, because it looks at it through the lenses of illness. A synthetic psychology would look at both our limitations and our flourishing. And it would do so through the lenses of expansion, of synthesis through the opposites, and of harmony through conflict. We would then see that we all have distortions, that we all identify with different distortions in our personality, that we live on a spectrum of extreme opposites in different degrees, but also that we are all looking for synthesis. None of us are ill. We are all looking for synthesis. For some of us, the distortions are more rigid, the search for synthesis more challenged and more difficult. And for some others, it's more flexible, all in different degrees. A synthetic psychology would look at how the soul is attempting to manifest itself through human nature, how our human nature takes us to polarity and conflict, and then it would help us to go through them in search of integration and synthesis. A psychology focused only on the positive will take us perhaps to a superficial sense of flourishing, leaving the conflicting aspects aside. But then, of course, the split is in the language itself, in the negative-positive dichotomy, because, as I said in the sharing of the panel before, it seems that we see our limitations as negative, but really, they're just part of human nature. That is part of who we are. And it is part of the search for synthesis, because I always like saying, we search synthesis through the opposites and harmony through conflict. And the key word is through. So that takes me to my second reflection, which is, of course, that this synthetic psychology already exists. And it was formulated by Roberto Assagioli a disciple of the Tibetans. And of course, he called it psychosynthesis. Psychosynthesis looks at our limitations, the distortions, the rigidities, as a way to go through them and achieve enough personal integration so that the personal self can then be the instrument for the higher self to manifest its qualities. And this, of course, is the highest form of flourishing, and we could say the highest happiness as well. But it is not enough for psychosynthesis practitioners, including me, to say, well, this psychology already exists. The wisdom teachings also already exist, and that doesn't mean that humanity is manifesting what the teachings say. The point is not that it exists. We can think of the wisdom teachings as a blueprint, and it's a blueprint for the long journey that humanity is taking to go to harmony through conflict. So it is with psychology, I believe. Psychosynthesis is the blueprint for a path that will help us manifest who we truly are, going through the distortions and through the opposites. Of course, not understanding these as illness, but simply as manifestations of a polarized nature. So we have that blueprint, and we are on a long journey towards that. And that takes me to the third and final reflection, that indeed the journey for us to manifest that synthetic psychology is long, and it will be long. And to see if we're making progress, the point for me is not to consider whether the message of positive psychology is new or not, because it is not. And we know that it is not. What is important to me is who the audience is for that message. Because now that the means of expression and the means of communication and the means of cultural production are more democratic, the audience for these ideas is much larger. And so we have concepts such as engagement, relationship, meaning, accomplishment, and flow, compensating the message of illness, the lenses of illness, and all these concepts are in mass consciousness. And all of them, we know, have a correlation in the wisdom teachings. But the wisdom teachings are for a reduced number of people, and the message of positive psychology can reach many more. I believe that our task is to welcome all manifestations of these concepts, all of them, but we need to understand their limitations and their potential. And while we welcome all of them, we need to lead the field of psychology out of the split into positive and negative, and into the synthetic whole, in which, and now I quote the Tibetan, we will have a truer and more accurate psychology that will focus on the person as a psychic entity and as a conditioning soul. I believe the wisdom teachings and psychosynthesis have already presented a blueprint. So those of us who have enough soul contact, and I don't mean just psychologists or professionals, those of us, all of us, when we have enough soul contact and we are sensitive to the idea of the synthetic whole, then we need to hold those blueprints as magnetic points, as the ideal, but we need to live that ourselves. We need not be afraid of our own distortions, to learn to live our opposites, to go to synthesis, and to live the conflict so that we can reach harmony. And as we do that, we will be the magnetic points for the whole field of psychology to go to that synthetic whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Maite. You spared me a lot of things to say because I totally agree about what you said about psychosynthesis and about you said about the split between negative and positive psychology. And in my experience, I think it has been a great event in the 60s when Abraham Maslow started studying successful and so-called healthy people instead of pathology. But it happens that pathology can come out of repressed spirituality. And both Sajoli and Carl Gustav Jung noted that sometimes people suffer and get into some kind of apparent pathology because of their spirituality. It's like the vessel, like Kabbalists would say, is not ready to contain the light. And so in most of the cases, pathology is a great opportunity to develop things. Not all pathologies are equal, I would say. And Carl Gustav Jung makes the distinctions between regressive pathologies and progressive pathologies. So this is important to know. I won't get much into details, but I discovered that in psychoanalysis, I know spiritual people are not much interested in psychoanalysis. They have some resistance and they consider that outdated and about sexuality, Sigmund Freud, materialism. Well, I found a lot of spirituality in over the last decades flourishing through psychoanalysis. And I could quote Michael Eigen, the author, the psychoanalytic mystic, and James Grotstein, who talks about an ultimate reality and develop a transcendental or transcendent dimension in psychoanalysis. And Christopher Bolus, for instance, speaks of the self as a God within. So I'm sure Freud wouldn't be happy about this, or maybe he would, I don't know. But this is very unexpected. Then I noticed that transversally, in all, I quoted, of course, Carl Gustav Jung and transpersonal, humanistic, cognitive behavioral, positive psychologists, CBTs, mindful-oriented, compassionate therapies are all somehow including and fostering the spiritual dimension in psychology. And this is totally new. And I sense that this is a hierarchical influence that is pervading psychology. And it's kind of astonishing. Of course, I'm aware of all the obstacle resistances, defense mechanism towards spirituality, and about the leftovers of a materialistic culture that we well know. But we have to acknowledge that this is an overall phenomenon which should be noticed. And I also feel that the spirit of synthesis is kind of hovering over the whole field of psychology, though each school and each theory presumes, assumes, and claims to be the best, and separatism is the real obstacle. And as we know, and as Maite well said, that Roberto Sajoli's psychosynthesis, we all know, has a peculiar role in connecting esoteric teachings to exoteric psychology. And it is the major effort I'm aware of to externalize the soul principle through psychology. For obvious reasons, I normally don't advertise this much in exoteric conferences and lectures. I hope I have a few more minutes just to point out three major ideas, but there is a lot more to say. And this is important because, okay, positive psychology is great. The flow, the idea of flow, I really appreciate that. But we should see the overall landscape, which is very, very interesting for esoteric students. Because we can touch, I would say, the influx of the hierarchy in this, on all this. So the idea of a higher self or soul, the idea of working with energies, we said transmutation, sublimation, and the will. Well, the idea of self would be, would be talking about the soul, but if even psychoanalysts speak about it, Jung had Jung talked about the Selbst and das Selbst in German, but mostly Assagioli's transpersonal self, more or less, they're evident forms of externalization of the soul principle through talking about energies. Well, we know that the objective of the whole psychosynthesis work is, in the last analysis, the realization of the higher self. Well, easier said than done, but still, we know the process. We have a map to work. Psychologically, this is for everyone, for the mass. It's not just for esoteric and oriented people. Talking about energy, starting from Freud's theory of libido, later expanded and extended by Jung into a wider concept of psychic energy, and in several psychodynamic theories of psychoenergetics, bioenergetics, and so on and so forth, we're witnessing a gradual development and awareness of the work with energies. And in the Tibetan's words, now I'm quoting the Tibetan, when considering the human being and his expression and existence, we are really considering energy and the relation or non-relation of forces. We are considering related units of energy functioning in a field of energy. The field of energy, which we call the soul, the major energy with which man is concerned, absorbs, dominates, or utilizes the lesser energy, which we call the personalities. The personality. We find this in a treatise of the 7 Rays, volume 2, page 424, 425. And this is, in a nutshell, what psychosynthesis is all about, beautifully summarized. And these ideas are expanding in the field. Of course, as Sajoli gave us tools, I don't have time to enter into that, to transform, transmute, and sublimate our energies and to work with energies. I only highly recommend the 10 psychological laws that Sajoli explained in the Active Will in the Penguin edition, page 5065, if you want to check that out. And we know the will, which is the core of psychosynthesis, was called by Sajoli the Cinderella of psychology and of life. And till a few years ago, you couldn't mention the word will. And among a group of psychologists, you were considered crazy, coming from another world. Will, oh, this is an era of determinism. But interestingly enough, and surprisingly, the will is beginning to raise interest in psychology. And I discovered that reading the APA, American Association Monitor, and what really strikes me at this forbidden subject became the theme of a bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, and it's the book Willpower: Rediscovering the Greatest Human Strength by Baumeister and Tierney, published a few years ago. This is just amazing. When I was young, I would have never foreseen this happening.
Yeah.
Talking about the will.
Well,
Well,
you asked me to interrupt.
I'm done. Okay, I'm done. I only say that psychology is actually externalizing the soul principle, and will eventually become a science of the soul. But there's work to do, subjectively and objectively, to make this happen.
Not surprisingly, the idea of synthesis characterized both of your reflections there. But, you know, the irony is psychology, as with every other department of human endeavor and thinking, is suffering from so much duality at this time. Very interesting to hear what you were saying about positive signs of synthesis emerging. But that's the whole battle of human evolution, isn't it? And when you actually look, if you look up psychology, the different departments of thinking, it is so complicated to work your way through. There are so many strands of it, like every other department of sociology, economics. Synthesis is surely something we need just to make some kind of sense of it all.
I wanted to say, listening to Joab, something very important for me is that we need to consider that psychology as we know it today is a very young science, maybe about 120 years old. And if we look at how long it's taking other sciences to evolve into something that is more akin to what we hold in esoteric science, like the natural sciences, to get to the point where they are today, I think the fact that the soul principle is being externalized so much in psychology, this has happened quite quickly, relatively speaking, right, in just over a century. So to me, this is a good sign. Of course, we're in need of synthesis, but synthesis, as we all know, only happens out of the division and out of the process of going through the opposites. So I just really realized, listening to Joab, how quickly the field of psychology has evolved. And I think this is really good. It's a very positive development.
Isn't psychology meant to be the science of the Aquarian age, and electricity that of the Piscean age? That was a fascinating. Well, maybe that's why it's progressing, because it's in the right energy field, and certainly it's addressing a need. There's so much need for people at all stages of psychological development at the moment. I was really interested, Joab, what you said about the will, that it was a forbidden word, which I can sort of understand. It's a forceful word, isn't it? It's a word of somebody telling you what to do, which is not what you want to portray, sort of thing. But and the book that you mentioned, Willpower, Rediscovering the Greatest Human Strength, that really, you obviously read that book. I have never heard of it before. It sounds like something, an idea whose time has come, and interesting to see that it was so popular.
Yeah, a New York Times bestseller. And Piero Ferrucci also wrote recently a book about the inner will. So, but his in psychosynthesis, so that, you know, makes sense. But as you say, in the last decades, you should have spoken about motivation, because will was too moralistic and kind of super egoic, using the Freudian terminology. I mean, kind of Victorian will. Rollo May wrote a wonderful book, Love and Will, in the early 70s, which made a difference in my life. And that was the starting. But we discover things that are really new, and I'm amazed in a positive way to witness what is happening since I started my practice. And now we have a lot of problems, but still, I think things, I see the evolution in the field of psychology, even where you less expect that. Then, as Lauren said, it's, you know, separatism, and it's really amazing that so many. I wouldn't say that psychology is a singular word. We should talk about psychologies, psychotherapies, because there's not a singular. There's not such a thing as psychology, because everyone would say, no, I am psychology. I represent psychology. And the other one would say, I represent psychology, saying something totally different from that. So it's a plural world. Nevertheless, as I really feel, I don't think it's an illusion. It's my deepest intuition that the spirit of synthesis is hovering, because I see that everybody's taking from others, and there are people in psychology who say, oh, they stole our ideas. I said, no, they didn't steal anything. I'm happy they're doing that. I'm happy we're talking about the same thing. I'm happy that spirituality is pervading psychology. In the past, wasn't possible, not even to mention spirituality.
I just wanted to pipe up real quickly. I think one of the greatest challenges, I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying about separatism and synthesis. It seems the first step always is to let go of your way as the right way. Right. People get so attached to their paradigms. And we are seeing a movement in psychology in the US where there is this recognition of, wow, cognitive psychology offers this, behaviorism, not so bad, it offered these things, and trying to blend the best of each of them, the theories. And so I do see that on the horizon, but people have to get over their attachment to the one, my way. They classify themselves a certain way, and that's how they see themselves. So we have to transcend that.
I think you were eager to
Yeah, so well, I mean, two great reflections, and I was touched particularly by how you both, as I expected, actually, you both could see the future, but you were very sympathetic to where psychology is now. And this chimes with me because as a medic, I despair sometimes at some of the attitudes and practices that we have and ideas that we have about how to make people better. Sometimes arrogance in the face of the fact that we cure very few people. But actually, I also am very proud of the profession in that it's a very noble profession, has come a long way in a relatively short period of time, and you brought that out really, and it also brought to the fore that you can't give too much out too quickly, because it scares and it triggers the vested interests and the people who've invested in paradigms that currently exist. And these are not people who are evil, it's just that they've invested in that. They may be very good people, but that's what they've learned, and that means a lot to them. And I think that if you give too much too quickly, you end up just being made a fool of, being trampled upon by the masses, because I mean, I can think of many examples of great teachers who've come along and perhaps given too much too quickly, and they've ended up in big trouble and have had to walk away if they were able to walk away. So it's just that idea that I suspect that there are many, many, many psychologists out there, whether they make it known or not, who are very, very aware of the spiritual dimensions, but keep it private and try and practice their profession in the spirit of the way they want it to be practiced, but also within the constraints. And it's like saying, well, you can do anything in your land as long as you live by the law of the land. Anything beyond that is illegal. And, these are all things that we have to factor in. But I think that although to many of us, the positive psychology and flow, we can see that it's a faint glimmer, but it's limited in its current form. As you both said, it's actually really something to be celebrated. And I think Chris made a great point. That's true. We've just entered Aquarius. We've got 2,500 more years to deal with this. And hopefully psychology will be sorted at the end of that.
Let's move on to our other reflections first. I just saw a little thing coming up that psychology is colours, and psychologists do not need to spray colours over their patients. I think that's what it said. It's disappeared now. But yes, let's move on. And yes, so it's over to you, Carly, followed by Lee.
It is, and I'm going to be taking a little bit of a left turn here, so bear with me. So honestly, when I was first asked to share my thoughts on positive psychology and flourishing for this panel, I wondered if I'd be the right person to talk about it. I had just learned of a community member's suicide, and my thoughts strayed far from positive psychology, but rather how as a community we had failed. I thought of disconnection, isolation, so many questions. I thought of anomie, which is French sociologist Émile Durkheim's observation nearly 125 years ago that those most vulnerable to self-harm experience a high degree of alienation, of separation, especially from their communities. Dysfunctional systems on all levels, large and small, contribute to alienation, burnout, health issues, lessened immune responses, not to mention that giant sledgehammer hurled in the direction of mental health, which often splinters off into myriad efforts to cope, such as distraction, escapism, self-medication. I could go on and on. This past semester, it was interesting with my students. I teach at a community college, so I have all levels of students, and I noticed several recurring themes that were surfacing in my conversations with them. Some shared openly about their mental health challenges and grief. Others were quite vocal about changes they've seen in our society post-COVID, especially what they call bad behavior in work settings. And I heard this most often from people working in healthcare settings and police work, in also, of course, retail, restaurants, hospitality, anything that has a public facing sort of job. In sociology, it's interesting, we have a term for these jobs. They're called front stage labor. And they often have this additional requirement of managing your emotions at all times, self-regulation, as we call it in psychology. And sociologists call that actually engaging in emotional labor. These jobs can be really stressful. And in the US, those who are overwhelmed by dysfunctional systems and chaos are usually told to just figure it out. At work, they're directed to employee assistance programs and told to adapt, be more flexible, be more resilient, think positive thoughts. I wondered how these dysfunctional systems actually constrain human flourishing and keep individuals stuck in the weeds, unable to transcend and elevate. I didn't know if anyone would want to hear about that. So I wasn't sure I had an answer to these either. But as many of you know, the magic of this work is that the insights often appear once the questions are asked. So how can and do individuals flourish within dysfunctional systems? First, I found it helpful. This is something I do a lot, encourage through writing or in discussions and with my students to tell their stories, communicate about the dysfunction. There's something very cathartic about that in a safe setting. And my first two panelists know this very well. My students also agreed that it is really unfair and wildly inappropriate to ask individuals to step up and be more resilient when the system itself is chaotic. We have to encourage wider conversations, and that the most appropriate place to start with dysfunction is often system-wide within organizations, not asking individual employees to be more like a Gumby, if you know what Gumby. Gumby's a little toy, flexible toy, which leads to a second point in positive psychology. Social support is an essential buffer against the slings and arrows of everyday life, provided there's a non-judgmental, non-critical ally of social support. This is where our first two panelists come in again, and their important roles as catalysts towards synthesis and change in the work they do. Engaging with others has a byproduct of transcending the pesky self-focus that we often engage in. That's the default. Actively participating in group work such as Triangles, World Goodwill, and arcane school conferences go far in building connections and nurturing group service. To me, the theme of our panel, Externalizing the Soul Principle, is the epitome of Mihai's flow state, being in service. It's eyes wide open, listening, reaching out, building community. It's speaking up and practicing ahimsa, being non-harming in thought, word, and deed. It's finding balance and synthesis between the pairs of opposites, being persistent in promoting inclusion, even when efforts are met with wariness and suspicion. It's noticing that some people do not have the luxury of human flourishing when they're homeless and hungry, as I learned two of my students were last semester. It means being aware of resources and connecting those in need who cross your path even being an advocate when warranted. It is living in the flow channel, being in community, tuning into your fellow humans as best you can, and serving with love, wisdom, and light. Exactly where you are. That is being in service. Thank you.
Whilst it is undoubtedly the case that positive psychology and flow theory and the like signify a step change in the psychological sciences, seen from another angle, they are but small steps taken on a long journey. One might say that at last the eyes have been lifted from their navel gazing and are being refocused above the diaphragm. A very welcome development. But let us be clear that this reorientation, whilst wholly positive, barely scratches the surface of the ABCD of the occult and esoteric psychological sciences. Nevertheless, one might define the present challenge before the new group of world servers as one of keeping the focus upon this new vision, which evidently seeks to unlock the potential in men and societies, and not allow mainstream psychology to once again fall back into the morbid preoccupation with pathological states. The babe has been born, and it needs to be nurtured by workers on the ground until it is thriving and its survival is guaranteed, not a certainty by any means. But what of the origins or the archetype of this shift in focus? Its roots surely lie in a faint recognition of the facts of the Antakarana and the power of the creative imagination to make all things new. It perhaps also signifies an unconscious recognition, perhaps an admission, that chasing the phantoms of the astral plane and the conflicts inherent upon the plane of karma manas represent never-ending phantasmagoria of glamour and illusion, inexhaustible in its interest, but ultimately futile in its capacity to provide answers to the fundamental psychological challenges which confront humanity. We are told that the seeming complexities and conflicts of one plane of consciousness can only be resolved by acquiring the vision and perspective of a still higher plane of awareness. Thus is dissonance resolved. This, of course, gives some occult validity to the value of the flow theory. This, of course, is what we try to achieve, at least in part, through the practice of occult meditation in its early phases. We are also told that the psychological life of the initiated disciple is actually much simplified in comparison to the majority of his fellow men. And for this reason, that initiation confers upon him sequentially a recognition that the many become the seven, become the three, and finally the one. And this brings us to the heart of the problem and to a recognition of its ultimate solution. When modern psychology can identify competently the ray and the rays of a man, then he is given the key to meaning in his life. From this, he's in a position to identify and blend with his group consciously, and to live in sync with his recognized ideals and with his celestial sympathies. This he must learn to do in its higher aspect, such that all men can live in harmony, yet true to their particular colour, ideal, and objective, their group or ray. In short, he will fulfill the Delphic injunction to know thyself. From this will flow appropriate forms, thriving societies, wholesome culture, and joyful individuals. Patanjali has given us a hint of this new psychology in his doctrine of opposite thinking, and perhaps even now we have a faint glimmer of this promise in the widespread application of cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. This approach is commonplace in the UK and is a key pillar upon which psychological therapeutics are based within the National Health Service. It is not perfect, but it is a step in the right direction. The Tibetan too speaks in simple terms of the technique of substitution and of the expulsive power of a new affection, and how identification with a higher ideal can help lift people out of their imprisoning thoughts and feelings. Both of these approaches shine a light on the path and indicate the power of the mind and of the creative imagination to release men from psychological conflict, whilst at the same time helping to transform the societies within which they function. It seems appropriate here to draw my reflection to a close with a quote from Paracelsus, the great physician occultist and the first of our modern scientists. Faith must confirm the imagination, because it perfects the will. The reason why men have not a perfect imagination is because they are still uncertain about their power. However, they might be perfectly certain if they only possessed true knowledge. This is the whole secret, says Blavatsky. Surely then the challenge laid before our modern psychologists is to further rent this veil on behalf of an expectant humanity. Thank you.
What's particularly struck me is during the minute silence in between the reflections we've had today, that tangible feeling of the power of synthesis is remarkable. And you can feel like what it is to build a group thought form together, like bits of a jigsaw coming together. And the power in those sessions is lovely. And it's also nice during the discussion to see the comments that have come through the chat box, which whether we get time to go to any of those, I don't know. But as they flash up on the screen, they're all helping us have this sort of communal exercise of building together. But okay, for our final session, what particularly came through in Carly's and to me was the idea of the will as an expression of the law of sacrifice, and hints of that in what Lee was saying as well, because the whole character of the true esotericist is a demonstration of the will as applied to relationship, and the understanding that the true nature of sacrifice is to make whole. So it's this spirit of sacrifice, this spirit of the will to good that the Tibetan asks us to use to set the fire of love aflame in the world. That's what the true nature of the will seems to be to me, about relationship and making things sacred.
I loved Lee's emphasis on the rays. That's something I wish I could share with my psychology students. I have to do it in pretty subtle ways, but it's really quite fascinating. I mean, it's interesting. Well, as I was writing in our chat prior to our email chain prior to this presentation, I was just musing about the differences in our ray types and what we emphasize in psychology, what we gravitate toward our work, and even what we choose to talk about. It's kind of interesting, and it's a wonderful reflection of the blending of our different rays and how we can synthesize even what we talked about, even though we chose such different directions. Well, the last of us did.
How do we see the idea of the 7 rays entering into the wider psychological field? Would it be through the nature of archetypes?
Well, Roberto Sajoli has a system to do that. He spoke of 7 types.
7 types, exactly.
And they go through, it's like the 7 rays, but without any esoteric language. And there are many psychosynthesis practitioners contemporary who've taken that further. And if you research psychosynthesis and the 7 types, you will find things that can help you without going into any esoteric language whatsoever.
And very
It's
accessible.
That's wonderful to hear, and it's quite unfortunate. I've mentioned to you also in our pre-panel chat that my students in Asajoli is never covered in introductory textbooks, which is really unfortunate. So my students don't even learn about this approach. But yes, there are always ways to sneak it in. I'll have to investigate that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a really small book about the 7 types, which I used to give to my patients, and it really works because they recognize themselves, they think about it, and very useful. And
I would love additional resources on that, because that sounds like a really promising direction. Thank you.
And how about this issue of practicing psychology in dysfunctional systems? I mean, is this something that you can do with Asajoli's techniques as well? I think Carly brought up somebody who's sort of really working on the coalface with very desperate people. And it's, clearly the tools that she is using is the right ones for the job. Is there anything more that can come into that field?
I wanted to say something about that briefly. There are many dysfunctional systems indeed, and I work with clients for whom the worst dysfunctional system is their own families. Families that are ruled through guilt and blame and emotional blackmail, no matter what social cultural background they come from. I also work with teachers in the public system, and they work in atrocious ways, in unimaginable ways, that prevent these teachers from really putting out their qualities and their soul qualities in service of the students. And I don't know that psychosynthesis has a special technique, but as a psychosynthesis practitioner, what I always try to help my clients do is, first of all, understand their own personal distortions, embrace them, go through them, find whatever integration and synthesis they can find, then understand the distortions of the system, understand them, bear them as well, and then bring their own quality into the system as a seed. And this is, of course, what we do as esoteric students as well, bring the seeds of change. And Carly, when we were exchanging emails before this, you mentioned something that your students, quoting Gandhi, you said the efforts to be the change that you wish to see are ignored. Well, I don't know how they can be ignored, but I know that if one person is the seed of change in the system, then the system has already changed. And the system needs to change individual through individual. And of course, then there's the socio-political work as well to take the system to change. But individuals can bring a strong seed, even in dysfunctional systems. And I help my clients do the same with their families, to be that seed of change that refuses to take blame, that refuses to take guilt, that it doesn't do the blackmail anymore, and therefore we're putting a new seed. So I think it is possible.
And I think that the truth of the matter is that all of us are living in a dysfunctional system. The world,
indeed,
it is
indeed
dysfunctional at the moment.
just layers of dysfunctionality.
Yes, and it brings into my mind how we all play our part through what Lee was referring to about faith must confirm the imagination, because that affects the will. And it is our work with the creative imagination that we have to believe in, because that is the way that we can each play our part in helping to build those thought-imbued those plan-imbued thought forms of the solution. Lee, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about dysfunctional systems, because it's so important. Obviously, we're told that the soul, there isn't any situation that the soul cannot flourish in. So however bad things get, it's still possible for a soul to do what it needs to do. But I mean, that's all very well, but dysfunctional systems can really take its toll. And one of the peculiarities of a dysfunctional system is that it fights tooth and nail to make the individual believe it's them and not the system.
Yeah.
And this is a really, really big problem. I mean, I loathe to mention specifics actually here, but you'll appreciate that the NHS is not in great shape at the moment. And I can tell you that for a long while, its problems have been blamed on individual professions within it. And it's now come to the point where people can see it for what it is. And trying to teach, for example, resilience to people within a system that is dysfunctional, fails to, just overlooks the fact that many of these people are extremely resilient and have just reached the end of resilience. So I think I just wanted to say that one of the most powerful psychological tools I've got to bring to bear as a GP in the UK, well, two actually, but I think this one in particular is the most important, is a sick note, a fit note. It literally is acknowledging that somebody needs to be removed from that environment for a period of time. They will often say, I say, well, how long do you need? And they'll mention a period of time, and I'll usually double it, because they'll usually underestimate how long they need. The other thing, of course, is that everyone underestimates the power of listening to somebody, and psychologists, GPs, anybody that works in an environment where people will just confide in you, you'd be surprised at how few people they have to talk to, and often you'll be the only person. And it's just the fact that somebody can voice something and then get some validation that actually what they're going through is abnormal, and take it from there. We live in extraordinary times, and there's an awful lot of gaslighting goes on in lots of systems that try to make people believe that it's them. So yeah, the systems have to change, and you do have to have whistleblowers and also people that are prepared to shout out. Unfortunately, the first few of those usually get crushed in the stampede, and that certainly is the case in my environment. So people do not take that action lightly. But I just thought it was worthwhile mentioning that, because it's true that the systems that we work within are important, and it takes some powerful characters to be able to change those.
Somebody's just said, well done, Dr. Lee.
I think I'd like
I'm still here, still going.
Any sort of concluding thoughts? We will have to go into our meditation shortly. I don't know if you want to, if we have time to have a few things that have come over in the chat box read out that Michael can
Yeah, it would be nice.
have a look at. I think we can extend by, we usually do extend by a few 10 minutes or so, don't we? Michael, do you, is there anything there that you'd, that's caught your eye?
Hi, Lawrence. Yeah, there's several great comments. There's this one from Joe Lewis. Thinking that everything that makes a human being from consciousness to creativity can be created from computer programs. So interesting point there.
Are there any more?
There's another one from Rosemary Steele.
We'll run out of time, so if we can just take a handful or so, and then we'll bring some concluding thoughts from the panel.
Okay, you said a few more. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Lawrence. I didn't hear what you said. It cut out.
Do you have a few more there, Michael?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
3 or 4, and then we'll come back to the panel for some concluding thoughts.
Here's one from Rosemary Steele. Autogenics was used by one local practitioner as an alternative to meds where patients response. Yoga for controlling diabetes have been involved. Several such approaches, monitoring with Kirlian to show the energetic response. Here's a great quote from Wayne Sturba, a great resource. For an encouraging adventure into how science is proving directly and indirectly the reality of the inner life, see Spiritual Awakening scientists and academics describe their experiences. There's a short video on YouTube. Lots of great comments of gratitude and thanks. There was one up here from Matthew Martin. Let me scroll up. I've lost it now.
Don't worry. I think that's
sorry.
That I think if we now go to you know, if anyone would like to make a few sort of like summarizing or you know, key points, and then we'll go take all those into our meditation and give them all a boost.
Well, I'll pipe up first. One of the things I wanted to follow up on what my teeth said about community college audience as well. And it's amazing skills as well. So that is something that I think my internet looks like my connection's a little unstable. So I hope you can hear me. I'll stop. But I was just talking about the power of being the change that one person can make a difference. And I appreciated that you shared that. Absolutely right. Something I always try.
Yeah, Carly, you've definitely come to an end. Anyone else?
I wanted to follow on what Carly just said, and also something that I reflected while Lee was speaking last. And before being a psychotherapist, I was a political activist and an academic. And I just had a moment of synthesis between political activism and social change and individual change. Because what I was suggesting before for an individual to flourish in a dysfunctional system is not for that individual to flourish, is to actually change the system. And that is the synthesis between individual change and community change, that the individual brings her changed self and puts it into the system for the system to change. I just wanted to clarify that. And perhaps that is the synthesis between psychological work and political work or social work, as it is for me. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, Lee?
Yes, I mean, I'm not a trained psychologist, but I'm very encouraged by what I've heard today. And yeah, there's some real green shoots there of positivity towards this idea of the soul, whatever we might call it, because obviously different authors will call it different things, and we can see that, but we can see a trend there. And having listened to my colleagues, I can see it's in safe hands.
Yoav?
Just I read two comments. One, it's what about the Hasidic story I said at the beginning, and the person who wrote thought it was about the Torah, but it's about the teaching, any kind of teaching, even the Tibetans' teaching, that they might flow through us, and not just, I mean, it's not just a Jewish limited story as the person thought. I mean, my understanding. And the other one, someone wrote that this is not a spiritual awakening, as a spiritual, as the awakening of materialism. I really don't think it's the case in psychology. Just reading the literature, just seeing what's really going on, then spirit and matter, again, there's no split, but there's a deeper understanding of matter. As Rudolf Steiner said, materialistic people, it's not they didn't understand the spirit, they didn't understand matter. And I think that's the point.
Good.
That's a lovely thought to finish on. My experience of reading Steiner is you always end up in a place you never expected to be at the end of one of his articles, which is a very sort of creative experience in itself. Just to mention that because we are focusing on an area of the plan, the service of the plan sets on the Lucis Trust site are available to you all. So if you want to continue investigating what the Tibetan has to say about psychology, just go on to set 6, and the meditation that we're about to do is also contained in that. So we can take our service individually onwards and build on what we've been doing today. But thank you all so much, not just for the comments that you've made, but for your presence, which was really wonderful. And now we'll hand over to you, Chris, to take us through the meditation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lawrence. And the discussion really could have gone on for a long time. It was wonderful. Thank you all so much. I was even thinking of things like, I wish that psychology was used between nations in internet, they, especially in the field of government, if they just could understand one nation talking to another and try to think of how they are rather than how they want them, expect them to be, it would be marvelous. I mean, we all know what psychology plays in economics. I mean, it's all about psychology really, and confidence in the markets, etc. But internationally, it would be wonderful if that psychology grew another department into international relations. So before we go into meditation on psychology, I just also like to thank not only the panelists, but everybody who has joined us today. And I'm so sorry we didn't have enough time to read out more comments, but we will certainly look at them and share them if we can. And I also like to thank Michael and Mikhail for their work behind the scenes. Thank you so much. And we will have videos of this recording, and they will be posted, I would think, in the new year. unless we are very, very efficient. So they will be on the Arcane School website, but they'll also be on the main website, upcoming events. We'll put a post there when they're available for people to see on www.lucistrust.org. So thank you. And let's go into the service of the plan. It's about a 15-minute meditation to finish off. Releasing the power of the soul. Lift the consciousness from the integrated personality to the soul. See a golden thread, like two intertwined cables of light, linking heart and head with the soul. Realize that you are now face to face with the soul, standing before the angel of the presence, who is yourself. You, the personal self, and the angel, the divine self, are one essential reality, manifesting through three aspects. You are a reflection of the Trinity of Deity. There is in reality no separation or duality, but simply a God in manifestation, whose nature is light. reflect on these words for a few minutes. Having pervaded this world of the little manifested self with one fragment of myself, I remain inclusive, overshadowing all my daily living. Then ponder on this thought. I, the manifesting self, through the magical power of my nature, revitalize, redeem, and reabsorb this fragment dwelling in the body. slowly and definitely, using the will, carry the life, the love, and the light of the angel of the presence back again consciously into the personality, knowing it to be the indwelling power of the soul. Use the mantra. May the energy of the divine self inspire and the light of the soul direct. May I be led from darkness to light, from the unreal to the real, and from death to immortality. Send forth the light and love of the soul in strength and blessing. Work consciously as the soul and as a representative and channel for the spiritual hierarchy. Using the words of the great invocation, circulate the energy through the 5 planetary inlets: London, Darjeeling, New York, Geneva, Tokyo, seeing the consciousness of the whole human race irradiated. At the end, please say the sacred word, either silently or out aloud. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center, where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center, which we call the race of men, Let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth.